All right. Hello, everyone. I'm Christina Joy here at Sankofa Video Books and Cafe. We've been open since 1997, and we've been rocking ever since. I'm here with one of the owners of Sankofa Video Books and Cafe, Shirikiana Gerima, and Brother Yao, one of the former owners of Karibu Books. And we are here on Independent Bookstore Day, or as somebody said, Independent Black Bookstore Day, because that's what really matters. Anyway, so welcome, Brother Yao, back into the space. I mean, there's Sharik, welcome home. It's so nice to sit with you both, especially as someone who hopes to follow in your footsteps. I look up to you both. I am how long have I been in the book industry? Since 2017. And I guess I've been in Black books since 2018. So, I have vested interest in this conversation, so I'm very excited. And so I'd like for y'all to introduce yourselves and start with your Black bookstore history.
Hi, thanks, Christina, and thanks, Yao, also for joining us today. I feel like I'm in good company for many reasons. One is because Yao has done such an amazing job with Karibu Books and his approach to book selling, to making Black literature available to such a broad audience. His daring, his stories of how he did what he did with such an amazing vision for Black book selling. So, he's quiet and humble, but we looked to Yao when we were getting in a mess or something. We say, Yao, can you come down and spend some time with us because we need some consultation. So he's been good enough to do that on a couple of occasions. So it's really good to have him here because this idea of selling Black books is not a simple thing. It's taking advantage of a readership that is hungry and thirsty for its knowledge, and it's also making a commitment to expand that. And that's in a world that doesn't even think Black people can read or do read. That's sort of it's not an easy nut. So we've been engaged in it since 1997, and here at Sankofa Books, and we added a cafe, I guess, in 2007. And we don't own the cafe, but we did, right? The cafe is called Sankofa Cafe, and it rents space from us. It has its own independent owners. It was started by Tensai Burhan, and he was is still around. He just moved on to some other things, but he's the one that put the African designs in the floor. He built these shelves. He's the one that is quoting Frantz Fanon in the front of the cafe, saying that every generation has a responsibility. It's up to that generation to fulfill it or to ignore it. So these are the kinds of that kind of sentiment, that kind of root is where we placed ourselves when we opened the store and when he opened the cafe. The sandwiches in the cafe are named after Black filmmakers around the world. So that Pan-African root is duplicated over and over and over again in the Sankofa complex experience. So that's kind of, in a nutshell, what we do. And we hope that it is a place for the community to feel like, they can claim it. The community really does need to say, this is a place for them or not. And so since we've been doing it since 1997, the feedback has been pretty good. And we feel very embraced. And we look forward to getting better at all of those things. Brother Yao?
Karibu Books began in 1991. Actually, just my wife and I were expecting our first child. My wife and I were expecting our first child, who was born in '92, and we started it as a vending operation. First at Bowie State University, where I'm now a professor. I've been there for 16 years now. But also right over here on 4th Street, on the backside of Howard. My wife was a student in the same department that Michaela came out of, the African American Studies department. A former business partner was an African Studies major. Well, not African Studies major, he got his graduate degree from Howard in African Studies. And so we started out with one vending stand, purchased a DC vending license, and then eventually moved to 3 stands. And then in the fall of 1993, we entered into Prince George's Plaza and the now defunct Landover Mall, and started kiosks there. And then over the years, we had a 15-year history, so we went under in 2008, but over the years, we eventually had 6 locations. So there was one in Pentagon City, Prince George's Plaza, Iverson Mall, Forestville, Bowie Town Center. Oh, and then at the end, we actually expanded to a location in Baltimore. So 15-year history, started the business with roughly about $500 worth of inventory, $1,500 for the vending operation, or vending license. And then near the end, we were at about $3.75 million in sales. So I think by most records, and maybe not the Shrine of the Black Madonna, we're probably the largest black bookstore that operated in the country. And again, our whole idea was, we had a couple of things. One is that we were very serious about operations. Our partner was an accounting major, undergrad, and so we're very serious about accounting principles being a part of the business in a way that's different from a lot of bookstores too. We took loans, which in some ways led to the bankruptcy, and maybe we'll talk about that later on. But it's good to fail, like a sophisticated failure is a sophisticated lesson, But operationally, pretty sophisticated. Again, managing 6 locations is at the least an MBA, and managing it in real time. So again, we have African culture, and our idea was books buying about African people, and to carry anything and everything it is that we could find that was published that dealt with black people. And because we had 6 stores, most of the time the PG store was the largest store, which could have most of the books that we carry, but we could always distribute inventory throughout the 6 locations. And then I myself am a poet and an English major. And so, again, in terms of what our approach to the literature is, covered a lot of bandwidth, similar to Holly and Sharik, is that, they're professors, which again, seems like a title, but then there's another way where, the rigor of academia, especially when it meets the practicality of a business or managing African American culture, is a little bit different than just a simple entrepreneurial approach. And so Karibu was a mixture of, of all of those things. The other thing that's important to say is that, if we're looking at generations of black booksellers, Karibu begins in 91, Sankofa's 97. And I'm not sure the year Pyramid began, which used to be right across the street, but they began, say, in the 80s. And they had 3 locations. And at one time, a location in LA, which is, again, an operational feat that, I can't even imagine. I can't imagine. And especially in those times, which is prior to the digital world. But the other thing, too, is that, and then we have Drum and Spear, which is DC. But I think, and maybe this will take us forward, is that Karibu operates a very specific place in the lineage, or a particular part of the evolution of Black bookstores. We move from the idea of the conscious or primarily conscious bookstore to the general Black bookstore. And so like Mahogany, they are our children. Both Derek and Ramonda worked for Karibu. And I hired Derek at Landover when he was still an undergrad. And then later on at the end of our business, they came, Derek didn't work for us, but Ramonda worked for us at the time. And so one of the things maybe we'll talk about is how that lineage works in line with the activist tradition that exists in African American culture. So when you get to Black Books Matter, which is the slogan of Mahogany, which attaches them to an activist movement, and that's connected to books. If say you begin with Drum and Spear, and you have Ralph Featherstone, who's a member of the SNCC, who was murdered in Cambridge, and then you have Pyramid Books, which is very much connected to the resurgence of Islam and Minister Farrakhan and what happened. So I think it's always important to talk about Black bookstores because we are part of the activist tradition, and we reiterate ourselves in the different manifestations.
So I'm glad you brought that up.
Keep it like towards you. Okay, use that. I don't know.
Okay.
I'm glad you brought that up because in my research about Black bookstores, Drum and Spear comes up as the most highly surveilled bookstore by the FBI. And when you think about the history of our country, like at least when I was looking at that fact, it seemed that was like a major issue in part why they closed because or at least that's what the writer of this article had kind of speculated, that they were constantly under surveillance to the point of like their customers being concerned that they were being surveilled too as they entered the bookstore. And I think even I've spoken to Tensai about this, the concept of being an obviously Black business, and particularly selling knowledge is a very precarious space to be in because they're always going to look at intellectual Black people a certain way because they're the ones trying to spread this knowledge to other Black people who may not have had access. And so can you speak to the challenges you may have faced in that regard, in that it being such a highly politicized business, even though you're simply at the root of it, just trying to sell books?
Well, I think for us, and I think when you talk about the iterations of Black culture and Black activism, when you get to, Black Lives Matter or Black Books Matter and President Obama being a part of Mahogany's book club, there's some very nuanced subtleties. Like somebody really needs to write a book about it because that perception that it is so activist and often untouchable has really transformed itself. And now it's a question of, and I think we talked about it before, is that, and Sharif mentioned it, it's part of the conversation now, which is that people need Black symbols of activism. But again, the bandwidth of say who those people are may be distinctly different than the way that it's been in the past. So I think that's one thing. And then I think with Karibu, one of the most difficult parts of Karibu in any like $1 million bankruptcy is that particular issue too, in terms of taxes. Like you're managing a collapsing business, and nobody really has collapsed like Karibu collapsed. Like we're different in that regard because of the financial complexity of it. And another thing is we had this hardline operational thing, and I'm going to jive Haki, and I always do, is every time Haki runs out of money, he travels around the country, but he travels around the country and he asks people for money, whereas that's not an aggressive business model. And I mentioned it earlier when I talk about the failure is a lesson within itself, right? So again, when you fail and you are operating in this range where, I mean, because there's exposure. I mean, we know how painful payroll taxes are. Again, taxes in general, managing profitability, all the complexities of a business. And so having that idea in your mind that Black booksellers have been subject to surveillance, you know, that's a different type of pressure exposure and I think that was a really important part of Karibu's in, just like the psychic pressure that you have, understanding that. But I also think too, that in terms of the general Black bookstore, I would imagine that there's a little bit more space than what you have when you get to Featherstone. That activism has changed in some ways where it's, you know, again, you know, and I say this too, is, I mean, George Floyd is a part of Black history, but he's murdered and he's also sort of voiceless. Like, he's not an activist, but he becomes a symbol of activism. So there's another iteration and change that occurs now where it's almost like, and you know, Coach writes about it when he talks about the Black body. You know, again, it almost becomes prophetic, but it's like we take a Black body that's been murdered and we make that the symbol of Black activism. It is absolutely reductive to do such with King or Malcolm or Featherstone. It's not simply their body is killed. It's really about their mind and the sophisticated nature of their ideas. So again, you know, and everybody knows I'm deep into the I Ching, but it's like, how do we start to look at the patterns? And again, how do we understand the different iterations? And then as we take that forward, I mean, what I'm really interested in is what is the next pattern? You know? Like, this should be some portion of African American history that is predictive. That's the next level for us.
In terms of the surveillance aspect that you're talking about, you know, I think it does go along with the Black bookstore, you know, as a place where resistance can be brewed. So, for example, you know, my greatest motto, and not even, you know, of course, the bookstores that have come before us in this area are very inspiring, but I'll never forget Oscar, what's his, Michelle? No,
Michelle.
not the filmmaker.
Oh,
Michelle's bookstore, the House of Knowledge in New York. And it was a place, you know, right there in the corner. People would talk to audiences, have their little stand, and talk. Malcolm, you know, who didn't talk there? And the things he believed in were written on the outside of the store. You know, Europe out of Africa, Africa for Africans. And so, was he surveilled? Yes, very, very, very much, constantly. But he took very seriously his role. A book is a tool. A film is a tool. You do things because you want things to happen. You want change. You have a vision of what you want to make better. So that, you know, that can be that vulnerability to surveillance, to intrusion, to obstacles being put in front of you and the rug being pulled out from under you are going to be constant, just for very simple things. You know, we organized I think I was telling you this before, we organized and under a Pan-African umbrella especially. So we organized filmmakers to go to a film festival called FESPACO. Some of you may know it, in Burkina Faso, Ouagadougou. And it's a Pan-African Film Festival. That's what it's called. FESPACO, if you break it down in French, it's Pan-African Film Festival. And so we organized an African American and Caribbean delegation to go 1 year. And we also organized a Paul Robeson Award specifically for a diasporan film. So that means you are saying, yeah, okay, Black is Black. Let's just realize that. Let's see what we can do, what we can, you know, create. A simple thing like that. You know, we got a call from somebody we heard something was going on in Burkina Faso. Do you know anything about it? There's some, it was just really ridiculous. We have a post there. Our post doesn't know what's going on. Can you tell us what's going on? We're just, I don't know what you're talking about. So it was like this kind of ridiculous. And then the embassy there also sent a note around saying they couldn't vouch for us to its employees. Normally the employees are told, there are Americans coming. If you want, this was back in the 80s, And so they were encouraged that when Americans were coming to that country, employees were encouraged to be nice to them, even help house them. But in our case, a letter was sent around to the employees saying, we can't vouch for these people. We don't know who they are. But then they had a reception inviting everybody there so that they could figure out what was going on. I mean, it's very threatening. Pan-African getting together with people of African descent is very threatening. I mean, anytime you see Black people in Harlem organizing to go fight in Ethiopia when it was invaded by the Italians, I mean, it was just that it's a very frightening thing for, an established system to realize that there is common frustration on a lot of territories and a lot of fronts, and guess who's the target? So, that is threatening. But, that's the nature of what you do. So, luckily, we feel like we do have some things that we have to be concerned about. Working in a city like DC is always difficult because of the city. I mean, I feel like 95% of my job is to look and see where they're gonna come after me next, what permit, what da-da-da have to file, what da-da-da-da-da-da-da, just to stay up current, what tax I have to pay. It is really difficult working in DC, let's just put it that way. And DC does have, I have to say, on the other hand, they have had some very helpful grants during COVID for small businesses, so that was very helpful. But, so that's just the environment that we work in.
Many of you spoke to like operational challenges earlier, but you also just spoke to the operational challenges, particularly in a city like DC or like New York or any of this cities experiencing gentrification right now, because gentrification is a monster that is right across the street and it's knocking at our door. And in this, you had said recently, Sharik, to us in a meeting that, selling books is almost the antithesis of capitalism. Like, we're not here necessarily our mission is not to make money per se, but the money makes the mission. The money allows us to get more books on the shelves, to expose more people to more literature, but it's so hard to generate with them at the same time. And with Karibu, I feel like because you guys were able to reach such heights, you see what can be done with Black books and the value in Black books. Because even though you were the general Black bookstore, you were the Black bookstore, and the Black bookstore that a lot of people in this community still remember very well. When I was working at Mahogany, I can't tell you how many people thought that this was Karibu. Because it's just, like, weren't y'all in PG? Weren't y'all in? No, that was Karibu. I would know all this history not having ever seen Karibu. Like, that's important. Because where I'm from, all the bookstores, at least in my little suburban New Jersey town, were Barnes and Noble, were like Borders, and and other little huge chain bookstores. So I guess I kind of wanted to place, but I think that people assume that people don't value books, but the proof is obviously in these businesses and the businesses that are continuing to grow. So like, how do you stay in it, and how did you stay through it, even without the amassing of capital that you necessarily needed to move forward?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that, and the reason I speak of the failure as a good thing is, I mean, that may be the part of me that is capitalist. I mean, my employees ask me for raises all the time. And I mean, and I had employees that made as much money as me. So I'm saying some years I'm making as much money as them, but my house, the way that I'm leveraged is totally higher than that. I mean, you know, I got all these things that I have to do, and my sense of risk, which is why I suffer $1 million bankruptcy, and they get another job. So in my opinion, I don't understand anti-capitalism on a base level unless you work a job and you never ask for a raise. You know, I mean, or you don't want no benefits. You're like, well, I'm working a job. And there are some people that do that, right? There are iterations. Yeah, I mean, there are iterations like that. And I think those people preserve the right to talk about capitalism because they're not capitalists. But there's another place, and I mean, again, if we're talking about activism, you know, I mean, Sankofa's history is, I mean, again, borderline religious devotion to activism, which is a little different than some of the other iterations of activism that we see at this particular time. Karibu's not that. Like, that's not me, right? And I'm just underground now. Like, I mean, you suffer something like that and you reconcile it with your ideas about activism, your ideas about money, or your retirement and your future. The baseline things that people work for, you can't just jump back in with your money. Like, I mean, the great Karibu lesson is, I just used all my money for some activist stuff that people don't even realize. Like, as a conflict occurs in the business in the last 2 years, I don't draw salary. All my employees did. Is that activism? That I didn't draw my money out and I liquidated my savings and all my employees kept their jobs for 2 years. The payroll is like $26K. I'm sorry, it was about $50K a month. So I'm saying, is that activism? It's like our idea of activism, and this is the reason some of the current iterations of problems is our idea of activism, and it's part of the digital age, is so, I hate to use uns, but at this time I wanted to say unnuanced. It's symbolic, it's nostalgic, that we lack a sophisticated understanding of activism, which enables it to be sampled into the narrative. It's almost like activism is this thing that exists as an idea that's rolling around in the culture. And again, like with George Floyd, when the idea gets out there, then it's like a rat race to figure out who can associate themselves with the concept. When in fact, there's another group of people who are deeply activists, who are working in such ways to do the work it is that they're doing. But I also think, and again, if we're talking about iterations and patterns, and we go back to liberation books, you know, Emma, I think it's Emma and Malcolm in Harlem, and then we come to say Drum and Spear, same time period. Then we get the pyramid. Then say we put Karibu there, Sankofa. Now we're at Mahogany. So, you know, what we're trying to do is establish a historical pattern. The real issue is that the major issue with the civil rights movement and Black Power, shortest lived activist movement in America, right? Runs like an 8 to 10 year period. The thing about this is everybody that did that went underground spiritually to reconcile the violence that they face in this country. If you're talking about surveillance. And so there's another iteration that's there that hasn't even been represented. And then I'll add this one too, which is that when you get to Obama and Michelle, what dramatically shifts the cyclical nature of Black history with activism is a Black president who throws us all off guard. And so the issue is, if you're mad at the government but the president is Black, how the hell do you deal with that? And so that changes the game. But I really think, and Sankofa contributes to this in a dramatic way, there is an underground that, again, when you get to Yoruba, you get to martial arts, you get to spiritual studies, there's an underground that was so ravaged by what occurred in terms of violence.
Yeah.
The murders that occurred in the 60s, they haven't yet even resurfaced with an activist urge. So that's part of, I think, the next pattern. So if I was gonna say, what would be a Black bookstore that would come after that? It's somehow connected to that underground element that has been reconciling the history and the past in some unique ways.
Yeah, and I guess the question on the table, what is the next pattern? I think that's what you launched us into.
It's all about patterns.
Yeah, I know you say it's all about patterns.
And iterative means that the pattern repeats itself, but it changes in a slight way.
Yeah.
So it becomes a different manifestation.
So that's why I look to you, Yao, because you've always had this sort of sense of, what is the next step in terms of structure. And I think that, even though you say Karibu failed, like it did lead you to another sense of what has to happen now. What kind of structure really needs to take place, and how do you put yourself in a position where you're not going to be so vulnerable, where you have more aspects of the industry under your control. Maybe that's something having to do with the next iteration as well, just in terms of operational efficiency. But in terms of the pattern of resistance that flows through Black bookstores and has flowed through our history, the next iteration, I'm sure, is going to embody resistance, because we are in a continuum of oppression that's just getting more and more sophisticated. Are we getting sophisticated along with that pattern is the question. And I think you've also hit on that. Are we getting as sophisticated? Are we keeping up with that? Do we have some strategies that will help us to be ready for whatever's coming around the corner, but also be proactive? Are we raising our kids in a way that says, you know what, excellence is not working for a corporation. Excellence has nothing to do with being famous. Excellence has nothing to do with a politician that can say everything in a beautiful way in 15 different ways. Excellence is rooted in a vision that is beyond all of those things. A vision is something that goes beyond what you see and what is really in front of you, but is what you want to be in front of you. If your vision is to be famous, okay, settle for that. Set up a camera in your face and you grin all day. But if your vision has something to do with your children's happy psychological presence, if your vision has to do with a place that is not afraid of bombs, is not threatened by floods, then the institutions that you build will project that vision. We're across from Howard University, which makes us really in a position to talk to young people, or at least talk to young people, and let our ancestors and present scholars and thinkers and creatives talk to them from our shelves and from this stage. And so the hope is that we are a part of that resistance by just being here, having that relationship with those kids, those young people. Do we want to honestly say what is true about a system that they're being groomed to continue to operate, and operate with they're being groomed to make it operate with a fervor that white people don't even have? Because that fervor to be excellent further to prove I'm the baddest thing. You know, the way that we're groomed to use our blackness against ourselves. Because I'm so black, I'm so bad, I'm blessed, I'm not stressed, I'm gonna do my job at work and I'll make the system do, well, first of all, I'll make the system admire me because I'm gonna, go to the top of the recognition and the promotions and everything else, and, look bling, bling, bling when I come to work. And then I'm gonna have my house, I'm gonna have my kids, and what I do at the office doesn't matter. It's a mindset, and is that excellence? Is that what we're doing all this for? All those people that Yao was talking about, that 60 sacrifice, is that what it was for? To make us feel like we can make the system against us better. So I just feel like that's a part of a discussion that we have to always have, because we fool ourselves. There's more for us to do and be than what this system says. Maybe the models of what we can do and be are not out there. Maybe is president being it? What did we really get? We got a very reactive white left that is so pissed that there was something black in the White House, that they, created this unrelenting tsunami against our very existence in this country and on this planet. So what do we get for that? What do we get?
And it's the absence of strategy that, we act like a white backlash is the worst thing in the world, but it should just be tactically considered whenever you make a move. I mean, if you're on a mission, then you understand white supremacy, or whatever you call it, because I don't even believe in that. Yeah, but what you do is you have to understand, we do this is what happens. And that's where it's not activism in the public realm, but there are relentless ways that people take an activist line. Because again, a lot of people got rich. Like a lot of black people got rich. Obama got rich. People get mad when you say Obama got rich, but I'm like, that to me is a capitalism that I'm not necessarily into, which is a capitalism that creates revenue based upon giving this activist byline that enables corporations and others to make money. But again, for all of that, like I always tell people, I could have got 100,000 Trump votes by just giving white people the case for reparations. I'm not getting no reparations, but if I was white and I was angry and dealing with the opioid crisis, and you brought me Ta-Nehisi Coates' article, I'd vote for Trump. Because I'm like, this is what I'm dealing with, and then now they're about to do the reparations jump, and like tactically that just seems insane. But the other side is that the Atlantic made more money than all of us can even dream of off of that. They brought that magazine for maybe $1 million or $10 million in like 2000, and then I think it was brought by maybe Jobs' widow and they don't have the numbers out there, but it had to be hundreds of millions of dollars. It went from being a borderline magazine that was barely able to function and was making the transition between the print arena and the digital arena, and then with Coates and the use of race as an idea, which is the crossroads of the conflict and the discussion for both the right and the left, it became the best magazine in the country within by 2016, and they flipped it. So I mean, the real question for us is again, what's the strategy? And the previous generation struggled with that strategy in very definitive ways. I mean, Ahimsa, King, Malcolm, Mecca, even Malcolm and separatism as compared to integration. I mean, there are these very complex strategic ideas that existed in previous generations that were people actively plotting the course. Now what happens is and this is just for now, it's not a reason for hopelessness, but it's a celebrity marketplace. Race is a market. Race is a market. If you can position it, but in that celebrity marketplace, has no strategy except success. You know, I mean, it is a capitalist endeavor, and that's why you say the underground, right? Because underground is clear. There are black people that are clear enough to see all of that, and they're not fighting to get on C-SPAN. You guys aren't. I mean, they're not fighting to get on C-SPAN and like be the definitive voice on blackness, because they're like, maybe it's not even time to speak right now. Like maybe it's just time to like observe, watch, again, figure out the patterns. You don't have to do anything if you don't know what to do. Maybe you just need to assess and figure out what to do. And time is what time is. Like, you know, we're not in this terrible jacked up position because there's always time, right? But again, when we take the wrong actions or when we don't have the strategy, then time begins to work against us. So we give rise to some of these, you know, some of these backlashes.
I kind of want to go back to the lineage that you spoke of, like the chronology of Black bookstores here, because that, like you said, we directly impact Howard, and Drum and Spear, I believe, was the first Black bookstore here in DC. At least that's what the internet says. But Drum and Spear was surveilled because of Stokely Carmichael. Stokely Carmichael was going to Howard, and was coming to Drum and Spear weeks after it opened. And then Drum and Spear closes in 1974, and you're saying that Pyramid was the next in that line?
Right, there may have been other bookstores,
That
but I'm speaking in terms of psyche.
Mhm.
Like in this area, Pyramid is, I mean, they
Yeah.
always have to be mentioned. You know, Adari Ali, he's a very important piece. Maimuna,
Oh, okay. Because I think that at least working in this industry, you do end up learning like different about older bookstores. Like I heard about one on U Street called Sisters.
Sisters Space, yeah,
Yes.
they're important. They're important too. Yeah, and again, I mean, two corrections, right? In terms of Black women, right? No, I mean, very important. And my apologies. Sister Space is really important too, because the other movement within African American literature from 1970 to now is the ways in which Black women's literature has become so important. I mean, the Nobel laureate Toni Morrison. I mean, this is, and again, interesting story. If we're doing history, one of the most important moments in Black history is when James Baldwin dies, and this is for the literary folks. James Baldwin dies, and Barack eulogizes him, and everyone is crystal clear that James Baldwin never won a literary award. Toni Morrison that year is rejected for like the National Book Award. Henry Louis Gates, Amiri Baraka, and check that, right? And a whole series of Black writers and activists. It's almost like this, what we could call it, a Pan-Africanism within America that doesn't even really exist anymore, where you have activists, nationalists, and literary folks all agree and put an article, and they pay for an ad in the New York Times where they're like, Toni Morrison got dogged out. That activist moment leads to Toni Morrison winning the Pulitzer Prize, and then also eventually winning the Nobel Prize for Literature. So it wasn't like everybody woke up and was like, Toni is the one. This is a result of an activism, but the other thing is that activism is so much broader than anything that could occur today. When we're talking about iterations of patterns, right? This is sort of like the last moment when everyone, it's the last fumes from the Black Power movement. But again, Black women's literature, and that's the other thing about Black arts, is one of the reasons that Black arts is almost completely marginalized is because it becomes the text that academics use to show the proliferation of homophobic and anti-woman ideas in the Black community. So it becomes this text that they can apply all of this to. And because it's already marginalized by violence, it becomes a sort of thing that everybody, so like when people talk in academia a lot of times about Black arts, did absolutely clear it was homophobic and it was anti-women. But then on the other side, with Alice Walker and Toni Morrison in particular, Black women's literature in relationship to the literary industry becomes something that gets picked up by the feminist media and becomes extremely powerful. And that's another thing that we have to consider when we're talking about this, right? And again, the moment that we're in now is the LGBTQ community. So, I mean, I looked at a book proposal the other day, and the critique on the book proposal, it's a Black book, but the critique was it doesn't intersect enough with the LGBTQ community. So that's a pattern too, is that whatever else trends in American culture in specific ways, and again, because we're marginalized in the publishing industry, editors have the power to tell us to document the literature in relationship to these particular elements, whereas the diversity of books is sort of like, I mean, okay, well, this exists. Okay, we have women's issues, they exist. Okay, we have LGBTQ issues, they exist. But perhaps that's not the book I want to write. The position that African American authors are in right now is you better be writing about that. You better be writing about that, because that's the trend. So you have to position yourself and in relationship to these particular ideas. And again, whether it's relevant or irrelevant is not the point, but if your book is in a pile and you don't own no presses, we got like 3, then your work can be marginalized and viewed as irrelevant. So again, it's really important in terms of patterns, because patterns upon patterns, but the idea of a particular trending element that's part of American culture, in this case, feminist literature, right? And the way that Black women writers become symbols of the perfect feminist literature, but then at the same time, we lack the infrastructure to do that ourselves. Because the feminist literature, like Jezebel, hell of a magazine. I mean, it's like, I read, there was an issue that occurred with a Black author, and I wanted to write an article about it, but I was like, I don't have the time. Like, I don't have the time or the money. Like, I could write the article, I just don't have it. And then I saw Jezebel commission someone to write an article that was absolutely, and it dealt with some of these issues too, in a sense of balance. But it's like, money is important for publishing.
Yes.
The fact that they could pay this woman to write this article, and I wasn't even envious after that, because I understood it as capitalism, not necessarily the craft of writing. But I think that's another important point, in positioning LGBTQ work in this particular iteration of Black history and activism. And then if we look at the 70s, in the post-Black arts period, or right as Black arts is going down, you have the feminist thing. And again, people debate whether Toni Morrison is like Black arts or not, even though she's the one that edits Revolutionary Suicide. Like, really, really important point,
No, I'm enjoying hearing that information that you gave about Toni Morrison. I forgot. Oh. We're just the conversations on the bottom. Forgot about y'all know. So I was going to say that I was very. It was nice to hear about that letter that helped to.
You remember it when it came out?
Yeah. Yes, very important. How that catapulted Toni Morrison into another way of being seen within an industry that really doesn't do anything except respond to commercial demand, like now diversity, LGBTQ. But so that's when you mentioned Sister Space. She tried, and Benita.
Sister Faye and Cassandra.
Yes.
Faye
and Cassandra worked really hard, to find a brick and mortar space. And they had about 3 or 4 different attempts at different spaces where they could sell those books. And one of them, as you say, was on U Street. But they really fought the good fight. And I don't know, because I don't know what was a legitimate opening and what was a not. Those phases of, okay, I'm selling it at my house now, or I'm selling it at a building now. But I think the idea was very important and should be looked at for some of the lessons I don't know if they are still in this area or not, but yeah, I think I hope you do write some of those articles yourself.
And ahead of the curve in terms of the relationship with the LGBTQ community. You know, like Sister Space is, you know, they're an iteration, so if you look at the LGBTQ community, they're an iteration of that operating in conjunction with the African American community in book selling. That occurs, 20 to 30 years before we're experiencing now. You know, which is really, really important, you know. And again, for that mixture that occurs, you know, again, with the Jan Levant and with Toni Morrison, you know, they're just all of these elements. I think that's the thing is, we're thinking about it strategically and what the future is, you know, and that's the academic piece, you know. Like, you know, academia has what its issues are, but there is a way, and we have no excuse with all the Black scholars that we have. It's not about arguing with them, even if they want to be celebrities. The real issue is you can ask them almost any damn question you want, and they can find information for you. And so part of what we need to be doing is utilizing that intellect for the difficult question. So when you need to know something or you're trying to locate yourself in these patterns of Black history, the beauty of this country is that this intellectual class has access to all these resources. So even though it hasn't been mapped, it's like if we're Microsoft or somebody else. The real reason they can do that is because they got all the engineers. They got access to people that understand the principles. So that's the benefit of being in this country, is that we have this huge class of people who've gone to Stanford, who've gone to Harvard. I don't care that you went to Harvard in terms of, I'm not letting you come in a room and be like, I went to Harvard. Do that with somebody else. But at the same time, if you show up, I do have like 100 questions for you that you should be able to answer, right? And the other thing is that if you can't answer them because you were a part of this system here that has resources, it's like being in Britain with the British Empire. You have access to so much data and knowledge, you can go find the answer for it. So maybe that's part of it too, which is how do activists or maybe even people in the underground better utilize the intellectual class we have here as a resource? Because that's the other issue, is that that's the way they're used by the white community, right? And then the other thing is they're mad because they're underutilized, that they're probably all getting asked the same questions, which is like, how do we do better at DEI? And there's a whole frustrated class of African-American intellectuals who keep banging their heads against the same problems that have been around for all of these years. Part of what we need to do for whatever quarter we come is to engage them in some very different ways and utilize that resource. So that's the first time I've heard of anything like a solution come out of my mouth in a long time.
I don't want to discourage that. But
yeah, because a lot of times it feels like there are no solutions, right? That you're just spinning ideas, right? It's hard to get
with
to
our
a
Black
practical.
intellectual classes, that the right questions aren't asked. And I agree with you, that's not acceptable. But understanding that they are a part of institutions that are developing Black intellectuals for the very purpose of a colonial sub-leadership or colonial management makes them very incapable in many cases of answering the right questions. And when those institutions, if they realize that you have begun asking the right questions, then their job is to spin you off.
Yeah.
I can't tell you how many, and how many Black intellectuals have come to Howard University and have left so frustrated. They get in so hungry for Black students, to impart their knowledge and hunger for knowledge, what they've learned. But Howard can't use that kind of person very long.
Yeah.
And so, scholar after scholar after scholar, Francis Cress Wilson, Ackland Lynch, Howard Gerima, Well, he'll tell us more about that. So they just keep going. Sterling Brown worked there for 42 years, couldn't get a bit of respect. Sterling Brown's house was where the School of Business is now. He lived to where that school of business is now. Is there a marker there? He taught there for over 40 years. Is there a marker on that plot claiming Sterling Brown, strong men keep coming, strong men keep coming? You know, that's a little bit threatening for an institution that's there to make sure that Black people become managers for a system. And, you know, it's not to say that Howard's a great place because but despite that unspoken purpose, Howard is a fabulous place for Black people to get together. You know, people who need to see other Black people and have a place where they can congregate. So my expectations of the scholars that come out of these lofty institutions is not that, you know, the crisis of the Black intellectual. So doesn't mean they absolutely need to be called into to the table. What can we do together? I agree with that completely. What do we do together? How do we make sure that we me? What you doing over there, brother? Wait a minute.
They always listen.
Well, that-
Listen now what I was asking.
You have to stay serious.
They just gotta tap your phone later. Go back and get the data records.
And y'all buy them. But so, and we're posting on FaceTime or something. So, but the idea is that we always do create an independent version of ourselves. So that was with the House of Knowledge, for example, his guts, you know, his bills were more than I'm sure his income was, but his guts to look at the people that the institution influenced is what matters. You know, Yao was talking about the presses that we have. You said 3. We had 3 Black
I'm counting.
presses. Third
Black
World
Classic
Press.
Press, Third World, and
Casanu's Red
I'm
Sea
talking about
Press.
Red Sea and Africa World.
Yeah.
Those are the 3 major ones that probably have over 100 titles.
So those are the 3 Black presses, major, the biggest Black presses. They're not the first. I mean, they can talk about Broadside Press, they can tell you who their influences were. Yeah. And other presses that were there that encouraged them to, you know, be able to do it. They are also part of a continuum. Nati in Baltimore, who also, he actually has a press.
Are we live?
Yeah. He's published some of our works, right?
Oh, yeah, he just.
Now they can name the ones that Nati Press publishes. So
Doesn't he reprint stuff, Yana? Doesn't he reprint stuff?
Not
Yeah.
He does some printing, but he does it through Paul.
Oh.
just in there.
Paul does some printing, but he does it under his own name.
So these are the quiet sort of heroes in, you know, the backstage of our community and our existence. Most people don't know about them, but they are making it possible for us. And I tell the story all the time. The reason we were able, and I think it was Pyramid Books. It might have been her diary that told us to go find Nati.
Oh, really?
It might have been. I'm trying to figure if that was him. And
Somebody needs to write a book on that.
yeah, Nati has a warehouse. He has, you know, this place full of books. You feel like you're a mouse and cheese factory. When you go in there, it's just stocked full of books. And he said, okay, you guys, we said we're gonna open a store. We don't have any money for books. He said, okay, fill your van up and pay me when you sell them. He's amazing. And so that's why Sankofa is here now. He's very quiet. He's not gonna say anything. He owns Everyone's Place, which is the retail version of what he does. So this is what I count on. It's very small. It operates in a capitalist system, but I don't know how they go together. My brother here figured it out. I wish he'd come on board Sankofa and, you know, figure us out. that pattern thing together, he said. Oh, no.
But I think the other thing when you mentioned Broadside and then even Third World is how a literary movement is connected to the presses. It's the same as PD P. Diddy, I'm sorry, Jay-Z, and say Kanye, is that hip hop enables an innovation in African American intellectual thought that has a practical application in the economy or in an industry, is really what provides us with economic opportunity. And so, you know, Nikki Giovanni, Haki Matabuti, so you have Black arts, which has this idea of independent Black thought, but also independent Black business that gives rise to presses. And Paul comes out of that too with Black Classic Press. He's later. And so one of the other changing patterns is that this new generation of Black writers does not have the thrust towards the independent infrastructure.
Yes.
That's the change. So everybody's for sale and everybody's for hire. So,
That's so deep.
you know, I was somewhere one day, and I probably had a microphone on my face. I don't even remember, you know, where it was. But I was like, there should be a Black tax. Like, if you making money off ideas that relate to Black people, we need a Black tax off that. You know what I'm saying? Like, you know, you make money, and I mean, and then there should be like some auditing where like, how many Black people did you hire? Like you get $15-20 million, Marvel give you all this money because you Black. Then how did you translate that back into the Black community? And it should be like an activist resume. Because what you can do now is you can say that you represent us, get rich, and we have no idea of even one tangible thing that you've done that relates to the Black community. And then again, you'll get $30 million from Marvel or somebody, and then be anti-capitalist. Be like, you not down with making money, but you get paid more money than all of us. You be like, nah, I hate capitalism. Then you make all the white people mad when you say you hate America. Why you hate America? You just made $30 million. Being mad at America? Any country, and I say this about America, any country where you can make that much money being mad at it, some of these white folks got a point. That you can get rich being mad at the country. And again, when you say strategy, if you gave me that much money, I can tell you, even if I was mad at America, we'd be on a mountain, me and you, Cherie, talking about that. But you put a microphone on my face, I would never say that. Because it's absurd. And again, I'm fueling people like Trump and white supremacy with like some absurd idea that they can use to mobilize other people against me. Because the basic, simple mind that don't make no sense to it. You mad at America, you make more money than me, and I live in West Virginia, and people on meth and have problems with opioids and stuff like that, and you mad at America and you get rich like that? I mean, that's an important part of the Trump moment, you know? So yeah, but I think that's the other pattern that we have to think about. And maybe the other question is what ways, and I mean, we'll maybe talk afterwards, but I have a project that I've been working on for a while, but what ways do we get to an independent? Like, how do we pivot? And that's the thing I think about all the money that's made. I don't even see why we can't build a company now. I mean, we have all of these African-American authors who are in the industry like cash cows. And I mean, of course, it's a consciousness, right? But the justification that we don't have enough money to build that press or to aggressively manage some of these relationships is really absurd at this point in time. Some people are very, very rich. But again, without a sophisticated movement that creates a consciousness that is strategic about the struggle of the whole people, and they just don't, and I mean, the other thing is some of them just don't know. Like, that's that thing in that pattern too, is that we're gonna give rise to a generation now where every time you say nationalism or capitalism, they're gonna think Elijah Muhammad sleeping with people in the Nation of Islam, and that's how it gets cashed out. Like, it's just crazy. Not that storefronts were owned. All of those things become like this type of black capitalism that's marginalized by the real contradictions. But again, people won't even have a pattern, and some people are not going to have a pattern in their mind that type of baseline empowerment for black people can translate
into the type of ideas that we can leverage into the marketplace. And I'll say this last thing too, is the other thing that I've learned is, and I always say this, and I haven't even mentioned China, which is just, all my energy, but if they sent 100 white editors to China in 1949 after the Chinese Revolution, China would be one of the poorest countries in the world. We underestimate what literature is. For African Americans, the absurdity of the Black book is that probably 95% of them have been edited by white people. So I'm saying, is it really a book? Like, one of the things we have yet to do is really own the technology of the book for our culture. So, again, a book at the least, no, not at the least and the most should be the documented, recorded consciousness of the people or future generation. What happens if 90% of your books were edited by white people? I say now, if white people disappeared off the planet, you could use Black literature as the best evidence of how they thought. Because Black literature is always responding to it. Black literature is like, if white people disappeared, white supremacy disappeared, everyone would be wondering, why were these people writing about these people all the time? Why did they think this was so important? It's like taking the floor out of something, and then everybody falls down. And again, I think, the idea that we're fighting white supremacy is that type of problem. Because eventually it's not going to be here. But we're so hopeless, we think it's going to be here forever. But I'm telling you, it never was. It's an illusion. It's the greatest contradiction that's ever been created. To say white supremacy, but then everybody knows that white people aren't superior. So that means the language itself is reinforcing a concept that doesn't exist. How could you not be crazy? Like running around saying that all the time. No, it's white supremacy. And again, try this on people that say they believe in white supremacy. And I don't know what that means either. But tell them that it doesn't exist, and they will defend white supremacy. So they don't like white supremacy. But if you suggest to them in real time that there is no white supremacy, then they become the defender of the very concept that they're supposedly working against. Absolutely bizarre.
That's a very good note to ask for questions. That's very, I love when you said that. But and I think of so many thinkers, so many writers who did have to spend their lives literally responding to this idea of white supremacy and Black inferiority, etc. The idea that when white people were going to be removed, that they still would be defined by Black literature is a little bit scary. I'm taking the mic from you. Oh, there's a question. I'm sorry. Oh, that's fine.
I actually had a question because your idea on the patterns, it made me think about. I'd read there was this article that came out I think like last year, and Shirikiana sent it to me. It was about Black publishers, like in the history of Black book publishing and trade, particularly trade Black book publishing, because. I remember talking about this about this with like Derek and Ramona as well. During the time with the Black Arts Movement and those books coming out and Third World Press starting and then Black Classic Press and Regency Press. This is that time where Black consciousness literature is like reigning for Black people, where it's completely like if you're reading a book, you're reading about something Black, you're reading about like revolution. This is what we were on up until it seems like the 80s ish, and then it shifts to urban fiction. Is that correct? And then from what that article had said, back to your point about Black women's literature, Terry McMillan had changed the Black literature space as well with Waiting to Exhale, because Waiting to Exhale was the first time you'd seen Black women in the middle class in literature and had like actually spending money to the capitalism point, right? So it's like we've gone through all these different ebbs and flows, but I think to your point about Black authors not being connected to Black presses, I feel like that starts back in the 80s, right? And maybe, this is me speculating, because who's publishing the urban fiction?
Yeah, that's the thing is urban fiction, again, important pattern, right? So we're like building a conversation, right? And we're using our collective knowledge to try and locate ourselves. So we haven't written the map yet. But urban fiction is, again, it's hip hop and literature. It's self-published. It comes from the ground up. It's make money, and then it sells itself off to white publishers. The average Black writer that's been educated in this country submits and submits and gets rejected and gets rejected and gets rejected, and then they sell the book to a white publisher, and then they make money.
Yeah.
Urban fiction sells books to Black people, makes money, and then when white publishers realize that they don't have the formula, now check this story out, is that I know one of the editors, or I think it was Vicky Stringer, right? So her book would come in, and I think she was with Harper, but her book would come into Harper, or maybe it was Simon & Schuster, but her book would come in, the editors would look at it and start to mess with it, and the publisher, the president at the time, would be like, leave it alone, it's going to sell anyway. We need to be studying them because we need some of that. Like, part of it is that the Black intellectual has pledged white folks so much that we imagine they have the right to edit us. And the reason that we hate on urban fiction so much is because they did something we could never do, which is they wrote something that actually related directly to Black people. So I mean, like, okay, are we going to say that all the Black people that wrote those books are irrelevant and intellectually inferior? Some Negroes will say that. No, the real issue is that let's be more, like we say, Pan-Africanism. Let's have a way that we discuss books and literature that occurs across the divisions about class and the rest. And Black intellectuals should be studying people that write street life literature to better learn their craft and how to operate in the industry. Because they did the impossible. But part of what Black intellectuals, especially ones that have been educated in the post-integration period, is they believe in white people, again, maybe they're not the first generation to do that, but they believe in white people more than they believe in themselves. So a lot of black writers actually feel ashamed of street life literature because they know they'll never do that. They're never going to do anything that a whole bunch of people would look at and be like, nah. They're never going to do anything that a whole bunch of people would look at and then be like, that's not a good book, and it still sells. That's almost impossible for a Black intellectual. I mean, the way that we pledged white educational institutions is we literally don't have the ability to do anything that white people don't sign off on.
Well, you know what? So that trend with urban fiction is a similar trend to hip hop or to rap. You know, so yeah, the rap came out genuinely from a Black experience. You know, people were recording themselves, selling those CDs out their car, etc. Original music, original critique of a life, you know, in a Black community, what we were faced with. And then it became it was co-opted. And so then when it's co-opted and money is thrown at artists, the producers can dictate what the content is going to be. So now we get to a place where the insulting of Black women in their bodies and women insulting Black men, you know, this tension, almost hate between men and women in music as performed, as relayed in lyrics, is expected and is funded. And you don't see that in white music. You don't see that in white music. You see, you know, our self-hate magnified in Black music. So, and with street, you know, I'm learning also about what you're saying about urban literature, because we never did carry it. And I know you guys carried it a lot. Like going into care books and like, this is how they paying their bills. because you guys had, you know, racks full of it at one point, right central, so I guess it was moving very well. But the co-optation of it was just apparently something that was inevitable. You go into Borders and all of a sudden, instead of having, and this was also after, you can tell me if this was after a stage of it being acceptable and published by the larger industry, where you go into Borders or Barnes and Nobles and they have a sign saying Black literature, all they had was urban fiction, which was also insulting to us because they took out, this was the quick sell for them, as opposed to, and so making us think that that was all Black literature that we had. It was just, you know. But, so anyway, that parallel, I guess, is what I'm talking about between music and what you seem to be describing took place with urban literature as well.
Yeah, and I think that's, I mean, now we're getting to the complexity, right? But that's what any nation is. You know, you say we want to be a nation. We want to be a nation where everybody agree. Come on, crazy. I mean, there are complexities there, but I also deal with just jobs and cash flow. Like how many books how many jobs that create when you selling those books by people that are doing that work? How many times does that circulate in the Black community as compared to the money that circulates somewhere else? So we have what our ideas are, but we're also sort of like a download of the Western world that the Black mind seems to think, and I mean, this never happened. I mean, colonialism is colonialism. Native Americans are genocide, Black people are enslaved, but then, I mean, Black people always gotta say democracy, or justice, or law, and order, right? And we get mad about it, and then even if you're gonna say that's not what it is, then you gotta say it in the right way. Have all your T's crossed, make sure that you have the proper citations. This is ridiculous. So I'm saying the real way America is made is by similar contradictions to the ones that we confront. It's not no refined, super, you know, perfectly edited junk. But the reason people love a Black symbol of intellectualism is we're so powerless that you can demand that we be more perfect than you ever were. What we have to figure out is how to manage those contradictions internally. So if you and I are sitting in the boardroom, and we got 500 titles, and I'm like, nah, 50 Street Life. You're like, nah, something. Then I'd be like, okay, well, Sharik, then you can publish an extra 5 over here and do an extra 5. I mean, that's life. That's the way countries operate. That's the way people who confront themselves and the world and come up with practical solutions, that's the way they do it. And just say, okay, well, we're going to edit some. I mean, we're going to start another brand over here that doesn't interfere with this. All the major publishers that you know publish Harlequin romances. All of these books that Black people don't intellectually, the intellectuals don't agree with. But what they do in the marketplace is if it exists and it's real, and this is what our business is, then we manage it. You know, like, and that's what all urban fiction is. The other thing is that urban fiction, who else processed the crack eaters and the violence? So that original impulses coming out of these books that seem so derogatory, it's our pain. I mean, like, it's like, this is what I experienced. And that's hard for some of us because we haven't experienced like that. We haven't experienced that, especially if we're a Black intellectual. But part of what that idea is when Black people were watching movies and listening to hip hop, start writing these books and they start talking about people tricking, or people getting murdered, or people trying to make a bag, go to the inner cities in the last 10 or 15 years, and that's what was happening. The Black intellectual voice is incapable of even producing art on that. Or if they do it, they're gonna model it off of Faulkner. You follow what I'm saying? Who ain't got nothing to do with that. So part of it is the original, like, and that's what I mean by iterations, right? So when we think of it as an iteration, okay, maybe we disagree with it, but understand what that pattern is, and then how does that pattern repeat itself?
Right.
And it's our job, we've established one with intellectuals, but then it's another job when we're dealing with, say, people that are in this particular pattern. I mean, that's where our resources and our intellect can be a great service to them. But a lot of times we act like white people towards people that do that. We feel like they don't know how to write. They need to know how to write. They need to go get jobs. We sound just like them. So it's like, I mean, again, somebody say Pan-Africanism. I mean, like, can we be like,
you know, can we have a pan-black idea
Yeah.
in terms of how we deal with folks who struggle over that? That's the struggle, to make those connections even when the gap seems so wide, you know?
But before we do have to open to questions, because people have been very patient with us. But I was just gonna say, no, I was just gonna say that's very valid. And to have, if a Black bookstore does to our people what has been done to us by others all the time and just make these judgments. You know, for example, one of our most difficult things is to make sure we have a portal or a way to make sure that Black new authors are able to get on our shelves. And it's been a challenge for us since day one to make that happen, but staff is also committed to go through that process of making sure that happens. And the thing is, being able to distinguish between books that, not in that process, but I'm going back to urban literature, the idea of an industry pushing something down our throat that they say now is urban literature, that doesn't give that urban literature even a chance to grow. So what happens with the writers that we, first time writer, we say, okay, let's try it, let's see how it goes. You can even have an event here, you invite your community, you have a chance to grow as a writer and have feedback, etc. Can't happen if there's a racist industry that's that is subsidizing a type that is then frozen because it's such a good seller.
No, I agree.
So the growth of that writer is not gonna happen because that writer is running after numbers now. Because the publisher is saying, okay, do me another one just like that one. And that the writer may have grown. They may have said, you know, I think now this character could do this and maybe they blah, 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 blah. But if they are selling based on a horrific only and not able to grow within that horrific, or whatever it is, whatever that growth takes place, it means that they are no longer, their growth is stunted and the market is completely taken over. The market is completely taken over the art in that process. So that's just my take on urban literature. But so, are we opening it up now?
Okay.
Are there any questions, comments?
1 second,
Lord.
It's
He
Josh.
said yes.
Hey, Josh.
Yeah, what's up? So, I love everything that you guys are talking about. As a current, up and coming artist, trying to embed, social activism and, the context of the Pan-African experience into my art. You know what I'm saying? It feels like there are often like a lot of like roadblocks in the sense of just capitalism off of that, right? And like in terms of like, you have to make money in order to live, but not really wanting that to be a way to, capitalize off of people, but more so to connect. So I would just ask you like, where do you find, like the balance between that? How do you kind of like cope with having to, in a sense, like utilize your art, utilize your expression to, like capitalize in a way?
What, and you say you are a writer?
I'm a multi-hyphenate creative, so I make music, visual art, poetry, any type of art. I just love expressing myself in any type of way.
So is your concern distribution?
My
If you sound like you have an obsession with creating.
Yes. My
So-
concern is being able to turn that obsession into being able to, live
All
and
of it.
live off of that. Yeah, because like I don't want to work a 9 to 5. Like that's literally out of my personal just like, and then I'm not knocking that for somebody who does do that, but like I feel like life is more than just fiscal capital. You know what I mean? I feel like the social capital that I can use to grow with that, but it also can be like.
Let me just say before I pass the mic on that the most important thing is your art. The most important thing is what you create. It's not the market you're creating it in. It's not the reader of the art. It's not the person that comes to the museum that looks at it. The most important thing is the thing that you create. You and the relationship of the thing you create. Nobody else can create that thing. So if you're willing to give it up because of a market, or if you're willing to compromise it because of somebody else's eyes, let them do it. Let somebody else do it. But if you believe in your eye and your heart and the way that you're obsessed with expressing that thing, then you have to create it honestly, genuinely from yourself. Otherwise, give it to somebody else. Let somebody else do it. You're the important factor there. So if you are able to say, no, okay, I'm just gonna look at the market and see what they're selling right now, or I'm gonna see what the museum is, doing right now, then you're shortchanging yourself. You're undermining your reason for being on the planet, first of all. Because you have something to say, you have something to make. So give yourself the freedom to make it. Free yourself from something else. Just say, this is me in this thing. And live it, love it, and claim it, and then protect it. Say you make it. Say you get over that constant barrage of market, and you're able to make the thing. Then protect it. Because there is a world that says, okay, this is something genuine, it came out of somebody's personal experience, I can make money off of this if I compromise it in some way. So the battle is not just to make it, but to protect it after you make it. And say, no, this has more value than some simple, shallow market. If you can see yourself as a greater thing than that, then you can see your art as a greater thing than that. Market is nothing. What is market? Nothing. It comes and goes. But your art stays because of its value. It informs culture, it informs generations after you. And it's appreciated in different ways that you may not even know of. And that's not even your responsibility anyway. Your responsibility is to get it out and to protect it. Then, who knows, maybe it will be the next, another generation will look at that and say, you know what, I see and I'm gonna go to Mars and make it do something. It has another application because of its genuineness, its individuality. It's not the universality that made that thing. It was you. And then let the universe come and look at it. The love that went into it is very individually you. You can't say, I'm gonna make this universally understood. That's not your job. Your job is to make it what you are. And then the universe will figure out how to relate to it. That's their job. If you don't, you have just lost from the get-go. You can just say, I'm not even going to be at the starting point. Because everybody else is looking at the market. It's self-exploitation for you to say, I'm going to consider market first. How are you going to live? I don't know.
Thank you, I appreciate it. Thank you.
You want to say something?
Yeah.
I just didn't catch the beginning. I wish I was here for it, but anytime I'm within 5 blocks of Sankofa, I've got to stop by. You're not allowed to walk past this place. As far as that brother, what happens when you can't pay your rent? But Coca-Cola says, we love your sound. Can we take that and put it in a commercial? Give you $1 million? Then you gotta decide. That's gonna be a hard decision.
I understand.
Yeah. So, but you had mentioned about Stokely and them following him. I used to, in the 70s, go see him every time he was in New York. I was in the front row. And at one point, he looked at me, and it was like I think he thought I was following him, that I was surveilling him. I was like, no, brother, I'm here to hear you. But the general conversation, it seems like the dilemma is the individual, get yours, go for yours, that's America, versus the community. You know, so you got to decide where you at, what you about, what you're doing, because that seems to be the real dilemma. And the last thing I'll say is, what's going to happen with that algorithm? Who's going to decide the algorithm on ChatGPT, which is writing books right now, for someone's algorithm? And what are they going to decide? Who wrote the algorithm? That's. I'll just throw that out there.
Yeah, that's some good prompt. So I'm jumping in a little late, but I'm glad you asked that. Especially as like a content creator and a music lane and everything. They got.
Can everybody hear you?
I don't know. Y'all can hear me?
Yeah, you
I'm
can
gonna open up this one. Alright, but yeah, especially in like the music industry, I've been watching like all the AI stuff. They've been sampling like artists' voices to remake songs and all types of stuff. I think UMG, Universal Music Group, is the only group that's like been trying to fight for their artists and do like laws against it. But I don't know, especially with like how shaky the music industry is, how many labels are really gonna make sure that doesn't happen. I see a lot of them making that deal for them for real, for real.
And that's the same thing with books. People are writing books with AI tools. So then that takes away the integrity of books. Because now computers can write books. So it's like, are we even reading human work anymore? Now this is the next phase. This is the next iteration, right? Like, how are we supposed to differentiate what is real information? And we've been dealing with that for years. Especially because working in Black books specifically, you understand that they do everything in their power to suppress our information, to erase our information, to books that were Black best-selling books are out of print. Why? Because it was published by Harper or Salmon or whatever, and it doesn't have value anymore to them, but it has value to us. Like, Third World Press is still printing the destruction of Black civilization that's been out since the late 60s, 70s. Like, we value our work. They don't. But we think that their valuation of our work makes our work worth something. And that's the gag. is that if we value our work so much, we would also value who is in charge of our work, who is the keeper of our work, who's archiving our work, if it can be archived. We don't have the same infrastructure that these companies have, and we don't have the means to do these things that these companies have, but it's in part because we keep giving it away to them. We keep giving away our literature. We keep giving away our work. And we're like, oh God, this fight. Like, come on. Like, why don't we just move to do this all together? You know? Like, there was, to your point about music, we saw some artists, trying to take their ownership. Now, what does that mean anymore? Like, what does it mean to be an independent artist if a computer could just copy your work and be like, oh, yeah, that's J Money. Like, who's about to? So, I guess I say all this to say, and to round out this conversation. What do you offer for the next iteration of Black booksellers, of Black bookstore owners, of Black art creators and curators? Because this is also a curative space and a creative space, a creation space. People write books in here, people write plays in here, people do all sorts of stuff in here. So how do we deal with this new AI world that's not gonna even be, we're not gonna be able to tell what's real and what's not?
Yeah, I think, and I'll be brief, but the I Ching, Ifa, the Kabbalah, his work through the metal metric system. Intelligence, and this is the thing, it's like if you believe in white supremacy, you believe in a transcendent way that everything it is that we even learn and educate ourselves and produce things is like transcendental. The only thing that's sort of transcendental is the violence and then the practicality of the particular machines to produce something in a very specific time and place, but they're always byproducts. They're by no means perfect equations. Nuclear energy, which is something that most of us can't do, that's a byproduct. It's a serious issue. So this idea of what intelligence is, that's where the problem is. And for African Americans in particular who are marginalized in the system, we are more likely than anyone else to give praise to that thing being transcendent. But it's not transcendent. It may not even be intelligence. It's just the way the world works. It's an expression or an iteration of intelligence, but it is not definitive as this is the way it gets done. And then the thing I would say about art is, just listen to jazz. What's improvisation? Philosophically. Like the ability to play the same thing again, and it iterates in line with your human consciousness and changes based upon that particular moment, then that's not being duplicated. It's not. Except by human beings who have evolving consciousness that mixes with their intelligence, who know what the record is. So the thing is we're dealing with a Western iteration of what intelligence is. No, there's more than that. That's the underground. The underground has been struggling with this for the last 30 or 40 years. That's who I am, right? The questions that I'm asking are not questions based solely on an activism that gets expressed in this time and place, but it has to deal with the continuity of my ancestors. I'm looking at the patterns. I'm thinking about it in different ways. And so part of what AI is going to do is it's going to displace and call into question that's what it's doing right now. That's what everybody's saying. They're saying, well, if a computer can do it, why was it supposed to be so smart? Maybe it wasn't. Maybe it's something else.
So I have to admit that I'm stumped with AI. I think what you're saying though about relying on our classics is very, 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 very important. I think classics are going to be more important than ever because they've been created. And what AI does is it pulls from all those. So you can ask it a question about how did Europe become rich? It's going to pull from how Europe underdeveloped Africa. It's going to pull from Chancellor Williams. It's going to pull from, our scholars. Whatever is on the internet is going to pull from that to answer that question. So does that mean that we just make sure we're steeped in those classics? Because this colonial presence, this colonially defined present is unfortunately defining our future as well. Because we haven't really cracked that relationship. Our children's future is steeped in a colonial relationship. And people that are walking around claiming the earth now are colonial robots just speaking their past. Their ancestors were doing the same thing that they're doing, and they're speaking present speak of what their ancestors did before, and they don't know it. So as the system just keeps duplicating itself, we may have to just really steep ourselves in those classics so that we can, sharpen our eye for the next iteration of a colonial existence. And as the AI spits out whatever it's going to spit out, the regurgitating of our intellectualism, does that make us more able to see it? I don't know. I am so concerned about that issue because someone just showed, a young person, Jordan showed it to me the other day how it works. It's amazing. It's really kind of frightening.
Yeah.
So the role of the artist really is something we have to consider. What are we saying our artists do? AI duplicates everything. And what you're saying about impromptu, I don't know. It might, I don't know, let's see. But it's something that this generation's gonna absolutely have to deal with, and I think that, you know, every generation has its own responsibility. So this generation's responsibility, the gatekeepers of our future, you have to take this very seriously, analyze it very seriously, talk about it very seriously, come together, read, study, and figure out what does it mean on your watch. If you're preparing an earth for your kids, what is your responsibility on your watch? And take it, and it's not like you're gonna walk out on air. Generations before you have given you some things to prepare yourselves with. The missing factor is taking your role seriously. Thanks, y'all. Thank you.